So today, going back, we have with us Dr. Mary Owens Thompson, who's our SVP Sustainability, as well as our Chief Economist, Helen Ministry, who's our Director of Energy Transition at IATA, and Dr. Alejandro Bloch, who's our Manager for New Technologies, who's going to walk us through non-CO2 emissions a little bit later. But just to give you an overview, we'll look at SAF in the first part. So what are the outputs, what are the opportunities, talk about SAF accounting as well as tracking progress towards net zero by 2050. Then we'll focus on non-CO2 emissions. We're looking at what are contrails, why are they an issue, and what is the industry doing to address them. Now without further ado, I'll give you the floor, Marie.
Yeah, lovely to see so many familiar faces, and thank you for being here. Let me just point out first of all that we're all part of the same team. The division is called Sustainability and Economics, and with this we signal that we try to look at these issues as holistically as possible, and we aim for airlines to achieve both financial and environmental sustainability together and simultaneously, and without one we cannot have the other. So thank you for letting me lead with that. Now, of course, SAF is clearly an example of exactly that. You know, we know that this is going to be one of the key levers in terms of decarbonizing aviation, and it will also add to the financial bill, of course, of the airlines. Now, there are many ways that we can decarbonize. Unfortunately, none of them are readily available today. So therein lies our dilemma, and of course all of these solutions are mostly outside of airlines' purview, because airlines are a service. They transport people and goods, and they are normally not in the business of producing fuel or aircraft or any of the other, many of the other ways and levers that we need in our decarbonization process. So clearly our message is that we need all of these levers as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, and as much of it as possible today, essentially, if we are going to be able to decarbonize aviation by 2050. Now, of course, we can use all of these levers in different proportions and mix and match them differently. But nevertheless, I think across the board, most everybody who has analyzed how aviation can get to net zero by 2050 agree on the fact that the most important ingredient is going to be SAF. So therefore, of course, we focus a lot on trying to get other people to embark upon this journey with us and make sure that we can have more SAF being produced. Now, the increase that we need is actually as great as by 1,000 times. Yeah, current 23 SAF production, going from 23 to 2050, we need to increase the SAF production by a factor of 1,000. So that sounds obviously staggeringly challenging. And this would take the production from 500,000 tons to 500 million tons if we manage to do this. So that sounds like it's really almost not possible. But the thing is that the world has achieved these types of challenges many times over in the past. And the most obvious one, I guess, is wind and solar energy. Not that long ago, there wasn't any wind and solar energy around, and now, it is actually the cheapest form of energy, cheaper than any fossil fuel, globally speaking. So that's an incredible feat, of course, and the money that was engaged in that process is very similar to the money that we think will have to be engaged in our process. And then, of course, we note that all the countries have signed the Paris Agreement, and all the countries have, are part of CORSIA, the UN body for civil aviation, and CORSIA is equally committed to decarbonizing our industry as we are. And yet, there is this lack of focus of minds in terms of setting up the rules and regulations in such a way that this becomes immediately possible. So that is clearly what we need. Strong and urgent public policy support and all of this as quickly as possible, and then we are convinced that this is entirely possible. And with that, I hand over to Hemant.
Thank you, Marie, and good afternoon, everybody. So just following on from what Marie has just described, of course, SAF is fundamentally important to us in terms of our route towards net zero 2050, also because it's a drop-in solution, because we can use the existing infrastructure in terms of the transport to get the fuel to the airport, but also use the existing airframe as well. So it's so important for us to be able to ramp up SAF and actually move towards net zero 2050 as quickly as possible. But SAF is an output from a renewable fuel refining process. So it's a product, and it's one of a suite of products that comes out from that process itself. And the other products which we've mentioned before, of course, and I think you're familiar with, includes renewable diesel and other light ends like naphtha. But the actual mix from that renewable fuel refining process depends on the actual pathway. So when you look at this chart on the right-hand side, you see it really depends on which pathway is being used as to how much the natural output of SAF would be in that process itself. And you see on the top two rows, they're both looking at the HEFA process. And there's a range in HEFA itself. It's between 15 and 45%. And many of you will recall, we've often called for an average output of SAF from this refining process of around 30%. Other pathways can give you a much more higher yield in terms of SAF. So we have a great opportunity in terms of volume, which is output, and how much of that is SAF. So alcohol to jet, you can have 70% plus. So there's an inherent advantage of different pathways and diversifying in terms of pathways, diversifying in terms of feedstocks, which is really important. Now, in all of this, policy is key, and Marie already mentioned it as well. Policy is the make or break to actually make sure that you have adequate SAF. Because if you have incentives which make the economic value or the prospects of refining renewable diesel much more advantageous than actually creating SAF, the refiner will, even though it's not the optimum, will create more renewable diesel. So if you take the case in the US right now, if you stack up all the incentives, actually renewable diesel is still more beneficial to refine than actually SAF. Now that might change next year when new incentives come in as well, but this shows how important it is to have balanced incentives for those products. Otherwise, we will always be on the losing end. And that situation has to change. So let's take a look at where we are with SAF now. So we're looking at around 1.5 million tons, 1.5 megatons, both mean the same thing. So basically, it's around 3 times what we had in 2023. So that's a good improvement, and I think that is indeed a positive message. We're looking at 0.53% in terms of overall uplift volume. However, taking back what I said earlier as well, when you look at how much of that SAF output it is as a percentage of the overall renewable fuel output, it's only 6%. So we're far from where we need to be. We're far from making sure that we as an industry get our fair value output of SAF as well. And that's creating problems. That's part of the deficit which we're actually struggling with as an airline community to make sure, one, there's enough SAF available, that there's sufficient markets available from the production side as well. So it's really important this is addressed. On the right-hand side, you can see our projection in terms of renewable fuel, overall renewable fuel output capacity by 2030. So I will make a point here that previously we've had a higher number out to 2030. It was 63 million tons, 63 megatons. The reason why you've got a lower number there is because we've parked a few projects because we need to further analyze them. And the reason why we've done that is because we haven't seen enough progress at this stage in terms of agreements, in terms of feedstock providers or assignment of the engineering firms and so on as well. So we are looking at every single one of these projects to really understand what needs to be done. We're looking to understand where there could be other efforts made to make progress on these projects. Now, I think it's important we try to keep a realistic picture as possible on this so we can make the right intervention at the right time to make progress happen. Quickly, let's look through the projects which made up the 51 million tons. So it's 140 projects covering over 100 suppliers, ranging across 31 countries. What we do see is that there's more projects now, and there should be no surprise about this, where there is policy implementation. So in the United States, in North America, and in Europe, you see more projects coming on board. Interestingly, in Europe, you see more smaller projects coming on board, and most importantly, using different pathways. So there's potentially a good opportunity here to actually make sure that those technologies are further verified and matured, and scale-up happens on the other pathways as well. And actually that leads to the pie chart, because what we're seeing there is that previously we had said that 85% of the overall outputs by 2030 would still be heifer-based. That is now reduced. That is now below 80. So there's more diversification. That's something, you know, we've always called for. We're seeing it go in the right direction. What else we do see here as well is there's an increase in terms of co-processing, which is now at 10%. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that as well. Because with co-processing, we see an immediate opportunity to ramp up SAF. It's a low-hanging fruit, and it's an opportunity where we see that we can use biomass as a feedstock, as an input to the actual existing refining process. And this is, of course, approved by the ASTM, and it's actually included in the ASTM Annex 1655, Annex A. So this is an approved pathway. And we're seeing now more of an interest and more action in terms of co-processing. If we can expand that ability across many refineries we have across the world, and I'm talking about existing crude refineries, of course, then we have an opportunity to start to ramp up SAF production. And this is really important. But what we do need to understand in doing this, of course, is to make sure that we are able to allocate, fairly allocate, accurately allocate the actual renewable feedstock benefits that go into the process to the actual products, outputs itself, and to understand how much of that allocation fairly goes on to jet once it's actually produced as well. We need consistent rules, because refining capabilities, existing crude refining capabilities are there across the globe. We need to make sure there's reciprocity in this as well. So very important, but an immediate opportunity for us. I do want to emphasize the last point, of course. This is a transition and an opportunity to actually increase the actual production of SAF through processing at the time. This is not a solution or an end to the solution itself. This is a way to actually develop further volumes at this stage itself. So we need to still make sure that we're able to progress on the standalone renewable fuel facilities with vigor in parallel to this as well. And lastly, let's go back to those standalone facilities as well. Because of course, renewable diesel, the refining capability has been around a bit longer than there has been the need for SAF. And in many cases, what we see is that those plants are configured mainly just for producing renewable diesel as an output itself. So there's an opportunity here, because of course, as we see, there are lucrative incentives for developing renewable diesel. And we would see that those incentives may be lesser or may not be so important going forwards, particularly as motor transport moves to electrification, etc. So what we could do is have a win-win situation where some of those outputs are switched to SAF. It would require some conversion, it would require some maybe fractionation units or special tanks, but these could be added on to the existing facilities, and you can actually have a shift of 15% more towards SAF. So this, again, is a second low-hanging fruit which we're really focused on. There's two policy aspects to all of this, and it's concurrent throughout the whole thing. We need balanced incentives across different products which are output, and we need specific incentives which can help in terms of infrastructure improvement and expansion where required to make sure those SAF facilities are there. Those are things we're focusing on right now, and it's really a question of making sure that we're doing everything we can to help the industry to produce more SAF so that it's available for the airlines. So, that's all from me.
Yes, back to me, actually. Me, young guys. So I will definitely continue where Hemant left off, meaning that obviously we're not sitting here waiting for other people to solve all our problems. When I said earlier that airlines don't make fuel and airlines don't make aircraft, there's still a lot that we can do to help airlines decarbonize, of course, and we are very busy trying to do all of that. And as Hemant alluded to, we are gathering all this information. Already that is a task and a half, yeah? Knowing that where these projects are and that they are real projects and not just marketing, so to speak. So we're very busy building capabilities from sort of below the carpet and up. Yeah, we're doing the solid groundwork and footwork so that everybody can have the information that they need and upon which to base better decision-making processes. Now, sort of related is this system that we are currently developing. So, today we actually have a situation where governments are sort of obliging airlines to do stuff in certain places, and then governments haven't really managed to make sure that the stuff we need to do is actually available. So, we have to buy SAF, but there's very little SAF production, as you've understood, 0.5% of the total jet fuel consumption. It's almost non-existent, right? And similarly, on the offsetting side, we have offsetting obligations under ICAO. The system is called CORSIA, and we're unsure as of this precise moment whether there will be enough credits to go around for us to actually be able to fulfill our obligations there. So we're uniquely motivated to make sure that airlines can fulfill their obligations. Yeah, so we're definitely driven by the need to make and allow airlines to be compliant with the regulations that are imposed upon them. And then, of course, if airlines buy SAF and they want to claim that against these various obligations, well, we need a system for doing that. Today, there is no such system. So here we go. We think that this is something that we can do as an organization to develop this system. Another reason why we think that it's important for us to develop this system is that we will do it on a cost cover basis, because it's, as I said at the beginning, very important for us that we can try to preserve and improve, if possible, airlines' financial sustainability along with improving airlines' environmental sustainability. So we have all understood that SAF is going to be more expensive than jet fuel. So therefore it becomes really imperative that we stop adding additional layers to these costs, yeah, and administrative layers that pertain to, certifying and qualifying and, reporting against various obligations. All of that can cost money, and we are trying to develop a system where those costs will just be covered and not based on any profit incentive. Now, also with this type of central registry, we would be able to allow all airlines to be part of the SAF market, and that's obviously also very important to us because we represent 330 airlines around the globe. So we don't want this to be a geographically determined market. We want all airlines to be able to participate. And by the same token, we want all SAF producers to be able to sell to all airlines. And that's equally important so that they feel motivated to take part in this global SAF market. And then, of course, this system, we hope and aim, will be governed independently and be able to earn the respect and adherence of all the relevant institutions that will take part in this system. And today we have support for our pilot phase of this project already from 17 airlines, from 1 airline group, from 6 national aviation authorities, from 3 OEMs, and from 1 fuel producer. All of these people will be engaged with us to test the system to make sure that it works, and the system is neutral in terms of the specificities that each regulator might want to impose upon airlines. We will try to cater to them all, and we hope that we will be able to roll something out to the open market early next year. So, it's maybe hard to make this sound sexy. I don't know. If I have succeeded, I'm delighted. And what's, absolutely necessary to understand is that this market does not exist. Yeah? The SAF market does not exist. There's no place where you can look on your screen and see the SAF price. It's all private deals. This is not a liquid market. We don't have this type of bureaucracy and administrative infrastructure that we need to foster this global SAF market, and we are trying to do our bit to help and make sure that that actually happens. And similarly, we are also involved in helping everybody being able to track the progress that we're making towards net zero. That is in completely the same vein. Yeah? We need to have the information to know if we're making progress and in how we're making progress and what is used more than whatever else might be used and so on. All of this, of course, necessary information for us all and necessary for regulators too and for airlines to improve the decision making across the board. So we have our net zero tracking methodology in a reporting platform, and we have 3 metrics that you can see on the left-hand side under metric in the blue box. And then we have, I think, maybe 11 sub-metrics. Yeah. Now on the right-hand side where it says sub-metrics. So this is the information that we are collecting, and you know, with the gracious participation of our airlines, and then of course we can average all of these things out and report on the industry as a whole, which would be impossible if the airlines didn't want to participate in this. So we're very grateful to the airlines, and these industry statistics that we can produce are obviously absolutely foundational and essential for everything that will happen in this nascent market. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so you know, the Q&A will happen at the end. So before that, and obviously as we've seen, CO2 emissions are a critical challenge for the industry, but we're also keen to address the challenge of non-CO2 emissions. And for this, we'll have our colleague Alejandro, who's going to walk us through some of the work that IATA is doing, what the industry is doing, as well as Hemant as well, to talk about some policy concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. Hi, everyone. What we will speak today, and Nico introduced the topic, is what are contrails, why are we worried about them, what are we doing about them, and then we'll take questions at the end. So I can imagine that most of you have seen them. There are photographs of different types of contrails there. We don't always see them. Right now over Dubai there's a lot of flights. If you are brave enough to get outside into the heat and look up at the sky, you won't see any contrails. So what are they? They are clouds. Contrails are clouds, and they are formed in very specific atmospheric conditions. These are conditions in the air where you have high humidity and very low temperature. If an aircraft happens to fly through there, some of that water vapor that's in the atmosphere will condense and form that cloud. You can see that on the slide. I've illustrated different types of contrails. Some of them will disappear very quickly after they are formed. They have negligible climate impact. We don't worry about them in the first photo. Some of them will create a white line and they will persist. And some of them, maybe if the region is large enough, they will create a white line, and then another aircraft will fly and create another one, and then another aircraft will fly and create another one, as we've illustrated there. And sometimes those clouds can grow and merge and then create a very high altitude cirrus cloud. So different types of contrails, above 10 minutes more or less, is where we classify them as persistent. So why do we worry about them? And we've seen a lot of attention to them lately. Well, it turns out that contrails have different climate effects. So during the day, it's a little bit like putting up an umbrella. It will cover in some of the incoming radiation. It will reflect it back into space. But it will also trap some of the heat in the atmosphere. So it has a dual effect. Some of those contrails might have a neutral climate effect. Some of them might be cooling. Some of them might be warming. During the night, we don't have the sun. So then it's just like a cloud. If you've ever experienced a cloudy night versus a night where it's clear of clouds, normally the one where it's clear of clouds is a little bit colder, and this is what those sort of clouds do. They will trap the heat. Now, this varies a lot. So if it's a cloudy day, then that contrail will have a different effect than if the day is clear. If you're flying over the sea, it will be different than if you fly over the land, depending on the time of the day. So each contrail is different. Some of them might be cooling during one part of their lifetime and then warming during another one. They would persist for, on average, 3 hours, so it changes. However, if we look at 1 year of aviation or even 10 years of aviation, and we kind of start adding up all of the contrails, then there is scientific consensus that they are warming. Aggregated, average, over a long period of time, the result is on the sort of right-hand side, on the positive of warming. But we don't know just how warming they are. This is the honest truth. A lot of papers, I have a table here from David Lee and his team from 2021, but other articles have been published 2022, 23, 24, and even earlier. And they all have different results. So some of them will say, well, contrails have a warming effect equivalent to about 10% of that of CO2. So they are warming, but just a little bit warming. And some of them will say, no, it's actually 3 times as bad as CO2. And some will say, no, it's just as bad as CO2. So the confidence to quantify them at an aggregated level is still quite low. Now, when we try to look at an individual flight level, it becomes even harder. I told you at the beginning, a contrail is a cloud. So if I ask, okay, can we estimate the climate impact of a cloud over a 100-year period? You can imagine it's not easy to do. Furthermore, there's no way we can measure that today. We cannot go out with a device and measure the climate impact of a contrail. We need to estimate it. And we estimate it using climate models. So there's still a bit of uncertainty on just how warming each individual contrail will be.
Sorry to interrupt, but let's be 100% clear on estimates. Estimates are not based on actual data. They are based on hypotheses. Educated guesses for sure. Yeah, so I don't mean to say that they are irrelevant, but there's a huge difference between an estimate and something that is drawn as a conclusion from actual data.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I'll speak a little bit more about that on my second slide. Yeah. So this, of course, is not an excuse not to act. This poor quantification is not holding us back, and in fact, quite the opposite. We want to be able to help to increase that quantification. We want to be able to help in identifying where these contrails are found. And so what we did, I'll tell you a little bit of the background, is we wondered also what can we do about this? So how can we actually help this problem? And we spent about a year speaking to meteorologists, climate scientists, researchers, OEMs, and we asked them all the same question: what can we do? Everybody told us unequivocally that we need more humidity data. Everyone said the quantification of humidity is very poor, and you have airplanes, and if you could give us more data, that would be really cool. So we said, okay, fine, let's look at that. It turns out that only about 10 aircraft in the planet have a sensor that can measure humidity, and these are part of scientific projects. Humidity sensors do not come as a standard equipment on the aircraft, so we have about 25,000 aircraft flying, only 10 have sensors. So we looked then at the OEMs and we said, okay, what do we need to do to put more sensors, and how many do we need, and how could this work? So, and I will show you on my last slide the publication that we did about this, but we really want to focus on this, getting more data. Why is humidity important? On one hand, it allows us to identify where these contrails will be formed with more accuracy. I said they only form in specific regions, and they are very small, about 150 kilometers in extension, so quite small. So humidity will allow us to identify where they form, but will also allow us to quantify the climate impact of those contrails, how cooling or warming they are. So it really is a key to enable more actions. And the idea is that this data will help improving the models. This is something that is happening already. We don't need, and I know Hemat is thinking about this, we don't need every aircraft with sensors. We only need a small population, just enough so that we can improve our models. And of course, this will enable further operations. It will reduce our climate risks in terms of moving an aircraft around when we don't actually know if that contrail will be created or And now I'll speak a little bit about the sort of action plan, but before that I'll highlight that there's a lot of things happening today already. I said the fact that we have poor quantification is not stopping us from acting. I've mentioned 10 aircraft already have sensors. Some of our airlines are partnering with universities, and they're using tools to predict where the countries could be, and then they're moving the aircraft up and down, and then they're using satellites to see if that deviation was effective or not. Another airline has involved their pilots on trials, so they will tell the pilots, you will fly near a contrail area, can you take a photo if you see a contrail? The pilots look, take photos and report. So all of this is at the stage of developing, of improving, of creating the models, of getting more confident on our estimations, and this is happening. Now we want to be able to improve those models so that we increase our confidence, that data can be transferred into the meteorological centers, which then feed back into these models. And we also want to understand the impact of future fuels. So hopefully by 2050 we will not be flying on fossil fuels anymore, but on SAF and on hydrogen. And there are a lot of research already today trying to assess the non-CO2 impacts of those fuels, and that has to be fully understood as well. Now we'll speak very quickly about what is happening in Europe with the EU MRV system. So first I want to drive a difference between CO2 and non-CO2 MRV. It's fundamentally different. For CO2, it's quite easy. You basically look at your fuel bill, how much fuel did you use, you multiply that by 3.15 and you get the CO2, and that's it. It's straightforward, so quantification. As Marie said, with non-CO2 it's very different because you need to input a lot of parameters in terms of trajectory, route, day, type of fuel, etc., type of engine, and then you need to couple that to a weather model that is already built on top of a lot of assumptions, and then you do an estimation or of what that impact was. So it's a little bit different because we are doing calculations on something that is not really verified, and it's very difficult to try to go back and see what those effects were. As I said, these are active research projects today of people that are trying to estimate, did I create a control or not, and then they use a satellite and they see it. So trying to report on sort of a fleet-wise non-CO2 is not going to give us the actual effect, it's going to give us just an estimation. Another of our concerns is that this is distracting us as well from doing other things. So I've mentioned airlines are trying SAF, airlines are putting sensors, airlines are becoming involved with university projects, and now they are getting focused only on the MRV, so it's really driving away the attention from actions that can actually drive a reduction in non-CO2 emissions into an exercise of reporting data. And it is the same for CO2, so we're still, and we've been speaking about that, trying to just win the fight on CO2, scale up SAF, bringing new technologies, and now reporting also on CO2, and the resources are unfortunately not multiplied but divided. So, am I missing anything, Hemant, here?
Well, maybe just to add on the point, some of the points you made, I mean, in terms of the number of aircraft that we required per region with the humidity sensors, I mean, we're talking a small population, right? So just to put that in, between 40 and 60 per region, for example, European region. That's about accurate. So we're not talking about a large population of aircraft to actually help collect the data and to improve those climate prediction models. And this, we think, is an important step. The other thing I do want to point out is, you know, this term MRV, clearly it's not MRV, because of all the things you've heard from Alejandro here, it's clear that what's been requested is some element of reporting. There is no measurement, well, it's limited measurement. There's definitely no validation possibility here. So this, to call it an MRV, I think is giving it a false premise altogether.
Thank you, Hemant, and highlighting the objective of the things that we are doing in terms of SAF, in terms of non-CO2, is to reduce the climate impact of aviation. That is our goal. So we don't have clear how that exercise is going to achieve that aim. We are not...
The finance. We have a number for how much we think that might cost airlines to equip
for the sensors.
For the sensors.
Yeah, okay. So So in the report that I will show later, we did do an estimate. These sensors are not cheap. They're 50,000 euros, 80,000 euros, it depends, plus the supplement type certificate of the aircraft, which can be all the way to 250,000 euros, plus the data transmitting cost. So there are a lot of costs associated to that. And to be able to do that successfully, of course, we're also partnering or looking to partner with governments. The sensors that are already installed on aircraft have been actually supported by governments, because that data is useful for the governments as well. It's not only about detecting contrails, it's about improving the weather forecast, predicting thunderstorms, etc. So there are a lot of co-benefits to that. But back to the MRV, just to be very clear that our position, we're not saying we don't want this at all. We're saying, yes, this is fine. This is one of the solutions and one of the things that we could be doing, but there are many other things. So our position is to say, well, first of all, this should be voluntary. Why should this be voluntary? Because that allows airlines the flexibility to be able to choose other activities as well. Maybe a certain airline says, no, I want to feed my aircraft with sensors so that I can give the data to a scientist so that they can improve the models. Okay. Maybe another airline says, well, I want to do the MRV to see if this is actually going to help us get a better baseline. Okay, that's okay. Some other airlines are testing stuff. So voluntary participation allows us to tackle on many different fronts at the same time. We want more support for humidity sensors. And if you go and read every scientific paper on contrails, every paper will say we need more sensors. So we're backing that up. Hemant already said this, but if we're going to be reporting all this data and the non-CO2 will get estimated, we want a way to be able to validate that that's actually representative of reality. Otherwise, it's a one-way street. We go, we report one data. We don't know if that is representative or not, if we're actually putting a baseline for anything. We want that when there are no data, when we have data gaps, we should be filling that with industry averages and not worst case scenarios. So this is simply for transparency, and because if you fill your data with the worst case scenario and then you happen to have the data, then it's going to artificially look like you reduce your emissions when you didn't. It's just data. So it's better to go with industry averages. And of course, conduct more research, continue working together as we are to improve on the knowledge. And just to finish, the report is available online. We've partnered with quite a few organizations, so notably the World Meteorological Organization, National Center for Atmospheric Researches, Aerospace Technology Institute, Royal Aeronautical Society, etc. You can see them there. And our approach was really science first. What are the gaps? How can we help? What do we need to do? About 40 people participated on our group, and this was obviously peer reviewed by everyone there with the group. Thank you very much, and I'll go to questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, floor is open. Who wants to start? Richard?
Microphone? Mic? No mic?
Yeah, mic's coming. It's over there. And then we'll go to the gentleman. We'll go to you.
Hello, Richard Swiwan, Airline World. Actually, I have two questions. The first is about incentives and mandates. At the annual Airlines for Europe conference in March, European airlines said we want incentives. EV4 Europe has actually started with mandates. But I also see that in the US some are saying we like mandates instead of incentives. What is working best in your view? And the second is, do you also look at hydrogen, how production is gearing up, if it is?
I love the mandate incentive question. I'll hold that one and then pass on the hydrogen to Alejandro in a few moments. So as an economist, the problem that we have with mandates in general is that you mandate somebody to do X. That will protect everybody who's doing X today. Yeah. So you put a fence around all the current X producers, and they will continue to produce X. So the mandate will tend to shut everybody else out and stifle innovation, yeah? Because it's X that you're focusing on. What we want is the exact opposite, right? We want many more participants in this market, and we want them to produce the whole alphabet soup of sustainable aviation fuels. So that's one structural problem with mandates. The other very disturbing thing with mandates is, as we discussed in the corridor earlier, it's like you have this inexistent market, yeah, and nowhere in economic literature does it say, under the literature about how to create new markets, start by creating lots of demand for an inexisting product. That line is not, I dare anybody, please send me that if you ever find that in any economic literature. So in terms of creating new markets, the literature suggests, of course, that you should start with a tech push, right? And once you have achieved the tech push, then you can do the demand pull. And the third comment I will have on this is we clearly have to be clear. It's very good if we can be specific about which policy for what purpose. So for whom are we doing these mandates? And that's where, I might sound a bit petulant, but, if the objective is to impose costs upon airlines who have, a very small single-digit net profit margin, and have that benefit the traditional fossil fuel energy sector that has, close to 30% net profit margins, or the banking sector that also has close to 30% profit margins, then that's obviously not good policy. And on top of it, I feel the need to mention the existence of the insurance sector, which is a whole industry out there that is supposed to provide insurance, manage risk, and reinsure and spread that risk across a large number of participants. That's obviously something that would make much more sense rather than saying that there's only one chain in the whole value chain that's supposed to shoulder that risk. So I don't mean to say that they are always useless, right? But I think that they have to be treated with great analysis. It's like, what is the overall policy objective? How do we get there? And what kind of support policies can we combine with mandates to make them actually work? And of course, the overall objective here is a global one. We want to change the whole world's energy supply from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Airlines and aviation is just one part of that whole world endeavor. And I think that is something that often gets lost in the debate about decarbonizing aviation. Yeah, we are 100% aligned with the global endeavor, and we want everybody to participate in this, and we want to change the energy supply of every industry, and of course also our own. So, on hydrogen.
Thank you for the question. Yes, of course, we're working on hydrogen as well. According to our net zero roadmaps, our estimate is that about 5% of CO2 reductions will come from hydrogen in 2050. Of course, we would like that to be more, but this is based on the current projects. I'll throw some statistics as well. 28 airlines have publicly announced interest on hydrogen, 44 airports, and these are different. This is all on their websites, different levels of commitment from investing to pre-purchase agreements and so on. So these numbers keep increasing, and we are on top of that. We do have a working group working with airports, OEMs, governments to try to see how this aircraft will operate at an aerodrome, and how can we do it to facilitate the introduction of service. So yeah, definitely part of our basket of measures.
Thank you. Can we go to the gentleman there, and then we come to the...
Hassan Al-Arafat from Qatar. First of all, I want to say the translation from English to Arabic is very poor and not accurate. This first. My question about the zero carbon goals. How can the conference take decisions or take steps to solve this problem? What is the steps for the generation for the airlines to take in order to reach this goal? And also the Qatar Airways, the first airlines in the region, use GTL, means clean energy fuel in the aviation. There is I feel that this step may raise the operational cost of airlines, exposing them to losses. What is your comment on this? Thanks.
The first part of your question was how did we get to take this goal in the first place? Is that
No, how the airlines can start to transition.
how the airlines can start to transition? Yes, of course. Well, I think that there are too many things that airlines can do, and which is the most relevant for which airline is not. It's an individual thing to address. And not we're saying. Well, I'm trying to say, although I'm stuttering, obviously, that we're not necessarily preaching one size fits all solutions for everybody. Yeah. And this very much goes to the SAF question, right? This is, there will be different rates of SAF uptake in different regions. There will be different types of SAF produced in different regions, and we want to promote this diversity and have everybody participate in the market in the way that suits them the most. And this has to be the case also for each and every individual airline. What makes the most sense for them in their context, what it is that they should be doing. But we certainly see enthusiasm across airlines and airlines adopting all kinds of positive measures. And I think one is, if I may point to Emirates in particular, in the exhibition hall, they have products that they are recycling from old A380s that they take out of use, and they are showing us creative ways of recycling the A380s in the exhibition hall. I mean, obviously that is not going to decarbonize us in one big sweep, but I think it's a definitely worthy initiative and one that deserves mention in response to your question.
And maybe just also to add, the elements I spoke about was about creating a market for SAF production, SAF supply, but we're working across all of our membership as well to give them the tools so they can best be able to source and to procure SAF. How do they make this work within the operation? How do they understand how is the best procurement option? How do they move towards their net zero planning itself based on their specific environment? What are the decisions they need to make? So, and you may have seen some of these booklets and information sources we're pushing out to the airline membership, but we're also working in terms of tuition and workshops across different regions, across all regions, to make sure we're able to address the breadth of the different operating models.
Thank you. Two questions, if I may. It's Chris Sergeant from Green Air News. A question on SAF and a question on non-CO2. The SAF question, obviously the investment required, as we already know, runs into trillions of dollars to ramp up SAF production to 2050. This is going to require a huge amount of investment. Are you seeing a change in the landscape from investors over this past year? Are you seeing the big oil companies stepping up to the plate on this? And my second question on non-CO2 is, as you say, Alejandro, the EU is looking to introduce MRV for non-CO2. Do you see this as the thin end of the wedge, and that possibly airlines are going to be forced to pay for their non-CO2 emissions at some point? Or do you think that technology and operations can solve the problem?
We'll do the same split. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great questions. Thank you very much. No, on the money side, we round figures, right? We think that our industry needs 150 billion per year in investments, and of course, if you top that up over 26 years, it becomes a lot. But But if you look at 150 billion per year compared to what people are doing in the global economy on a yearly basis, it shrinks dramatically, sort of in terms of perspective. And so first of all, about 150 billion a year was sort of also what went into the development of respectively wind and solar energies. Yeah. So, to me that looks perfectly normal. We're trying to develop a new energy market. Yeah, it's entirely comparable with those two. So that looks good. And then, you have to look at what happens in the oil and gas sector. So today in the oil and gas sector, we have 800 billion going into the oil and gas sector on an annual basis. 800. Yeah. So, and then we have the International Energy Agency estimating how much do we need to invest in oil for the oil that we're going to need in 2050. Yeah, we will all need oil in 2050 as well, right? So the International Energy Agency says we need to invest 400 billion a year today until 2050 to have the oil that we want in 2050. So I obviously conclude that we have an overinvestment of 400 billion into the oil and gas sector, and we only need 150 billion of that.
Thank you for the question. Shukran, if the translation is not working well. Yeah, on the question, I suppose that is a danger, and it's concerning because if things go that way of just charging, it's not really helping to mitigate. It would just increase yet another cost. I mean, you also explained the cost of scaling up SAF, and there's also the cost to the airlines, and then there's also the cost of the hydrogen aircraft, and then on top of that, the cost of contrails, right? So it will be quite concerning if things move in that direction, particularly because it doesn't help to mitigate. I know Hemant will chip in, and just to say that definitely we see things moving in the direction of maturing the operations and technologies to be able to reduce. At this stage, if we could just say, okay, let's just clean the sky out of countries completely, that would result in entire areas of the airspace being blocked with airplanes flying around it, potentially at the cost of CO2. And we're not at the stage that we can trade those two because of the poor quantification of non-CO2. So it's definitely moving in the right direction, but there are climate risks that we need to assess very carefully.
Can I complete my answer with just one more comment too? So you did actually ask what are the oil and gas companies themselves doing. So out of all the money that they are making, they are, with that, they manage to participate in the global investment endeavor into renewable fuels to the height of 3%, if I am not mistaken. Fact check, of course, everybody, and this would be, the source would be the International Energy Agency. So the oil and gas sector is, with its own profits, financing 3% of the global effort to make more renewable energy.
Sorry, just also, one of the points you asked was whether we're getting more interest from the financiers. And the answer is yes. From IATA, we are getting approached more and more by financiers, by VCs, who are more interested in understanding what the landscape actually yields, or what the potential is in terms of new SAF production facilities. So I think that's interesting. We're at the early stages, but it's part of what I was trying to explain earlier, is that we need to create the right facilities to bring the different stakeholders together and really progress on these projects, and we're certainly seeing more interest from financiers.
Thank you. We'll take 2 more questions over there, and then we'll be available here at the front and outside for more questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte Ryan from Bloomberg. Firstly, just a point of clarification from your opening presentation, Hemant. You were talking about cumulative renewable fuel capacity getting to 51 million tonnes by 2030, and I think you said that target had been revised down because some projects hadn't come online. Just wondered if you can repeat what that was previously and when it was revised. And then secondly, whenever I speak to airlines in Europe, I hear over and over again that there's too much stick and not enough carrot when it comes to SAF. production. Do you agree with that? And what would you like to see in terms of incentives in Europe? Thank you.
So, first part first. Yes, we had 63 million tons last year, December last year. What I said was that we have not included all the projects that we had allocated previously, because some, as we've gone through each project this year, some haven't progressed as quickly as we, well, at the right time as we would have liked. So that they are basically on hold until we do a further review. But I think it's very important that we are presenting numbers for which we have some certainty as to this is moving in the right direction. Second one, in terms of incentives. Yeah, absolutely. Mandates themselves, as Maria explained, do not guarantee supply. So we need to have the incentives there. I mean, there's good examples like the IRA and the Blenders Tax Credit, but they also there's a series of incentives which need to be rolled out to help in terms of the actual production facilities going into place as well, in terms of the engineering aspects. So there's, and again, in terms of the IRA and what's actually happened with the SAF Grand Challenge, there have been loan guarantees and so on to support that development. So I think we need to make sure these types of initiatives are rolled out across the globe to actually make sure that we can have those SAF facilities coming online.
Can I add to that? Sure. Sorry, I just want to add to that. So, we must understand, that governments, all governments, I think, pretty much really almost without exceptions, and the US and Iran probably are the greatest ones who do this activity that I will soon come to, and the Europeans do it as well, and everybody else does as well. And what they do is that they subsidize fossil fuel production, exploration and production. There's, of course, even greater fossil fuel consumption subsidies, yeah? And that's a completely different beast. This is when countries essentially try to use that as a welfare program. So I'm not talking about consumption subsidies. I don't think those are necessarily the best welfare programs either, but that's not the conversation here. So it is the production subsidies that all of these countries who have signed the Paris Agreement are involved in that are so absolutely galling when we are having this conversation. Because obviously the private money is going to follow the public money. The public money is going to fossil fuel production. And, we face obligations, although, of course, we are, 100% committed to our own decarbonization. But, to the extent that we face obligations, it's just absolutely staggering that they can emit these obligations and put them upon an industry and then not help that industry meet those obligations, but help the other industry whose activities we are obviously ostensibly trying to shrink. So this is clearly the number one thing to do would be to take away these fossil fuel subsidies, and which all of these countries have promised that they will do at every COP and every other opportunity that they get to promise this, but they don't reduce them. So this year, we will have a record output of oil. Yeah. This year will be a record oil pumping year, according to the International Energy Agency, and therefore we can assume that this will also be a record subsidy year for fossil fuel production. So if we could stop that, then we would already level the incentive playing field a bit across various types of energies. That would be obviously the number one thing to do. And the number two thing to do would then be to skew it in favor of the energy that you're trying to develop. And that is renewable energies in general. We really want the world to, that not just we, yeah, the Paris Agreement and all of these signatory countries have said that what we want is to diminish the use of fossil fuels and increase the use of renewable energy. We subscribe to that wholeheartedly, to that global objective, and we want that to become a reality for our industry and for every industry because all industries use fossil fuels. So that's where we're sitting. That would be a staggeringly useful change in the incentive profile, with obviously an immediate and meaningful impact on not only our industry but every industry.
Andrea Scholz, aviation journalist. Marie, what you just commented is that the explanation why the coalition of the willing to accelerate SAF uptake, that only one fuel producer so far is member of that coalition, if you like?
Yes, I cannot comment on why they choose or don't choose to be a member of what coalition, unfortunately. But you know, it's obviously clear. If we look at stock market performance these days, right? You know, all the oil stocks are rallying, and all the renewable energy stocks are tanking. Yeah. When oil companies make announcements saying that they have removed their renewable energy targets, you know, then that improves their stock market performance. And companies that say that they have adopted renewable energy targets, well, they see their performance decline. So this is the thing is that it's so easy to just put a hole in the ground and drill for oil and make buckets of money. Yeah. And then on the other side, we have a situation where that's clearly not the case yet. First, we have to find some kind of feedstock. That maybe that feedstock is liquid. That's good in the case of HEFA. Maybe it's not liquid, in which case it has to be made into a liquid that we can blend with jet and put into airplanes. This is obviously a much more complicated process, and you know, the profit margins are sort of unknown. I think you know, let me point out, yeah, we are not asking for subsidies for us. Yeah, we're asking for help so that the investment proposition for renewable energies in general, and then of course in our case for SAF in particular, gets the support that they need so that they can actually happen in accordance with what, you know, all these member states have already said. So, you know, why are they not doing it? The only reason I can find to explain why some, you know, most oil companies are not engaged in this is the skewed profitability. So if we can help them with certainty about revenues, such as, you know, what was used in the wind industry, they used contracts for difference, for instance, yeah, to put sort of a floor under these prices, and you know, that's a way of skewing the attractiveness of the investment proposition. I'm 100% in favor of those types of measures, if you want to call them incentives, or under which bucket we put them, so to speak. Yeah. But and you know, in our little way, as we've shown here in this presentation, we're trying to help the investment proposition too, by building bureaucratic administrative systems that can make all of this possible. So our system is not going to produce miracles in and of itself, but it's a system without which no miracles will be produced. Yeah. So that's where we're sitting, and you know, in a sense, that's also an incentive to the extent that we're taking that upon ourselves to do graciously for the universe.